It's all about food, farming and rural affairs as well. On this week's episode of the podcast, we're meeting Razan Al-Zeus, the podcast.
Yorkshire Farming.
Gareth Barlow.
BBC Radio York.
And as we've said on Yorkshire Farming before, for the last 12 weeks, hens have been cooped up in barns to protect them against bird flu. It's a topic we've covered well, and we've asked people in York if they were concerned if their eggs weren't free range.
I didn't know that they were inside. I thought free-range chickens were free-range, not kept inside.
Not really, no. Of course, I guess, they brought them inside for their own good, and so I'll still be quite happy with that.
To be honest, we didn't really consider that. We just buy free-range eggs, never really considering that they aren't actually outside the mum.
Really,
but saying that...
no alternative, have they, really?
I don't think it makes all that much difference. I don't like the idea of hens just being... I don't know what you call it when they're all in pens and just laying eggs and people collecting them. I like them to be free and running around, but you can't always get it, can you?
So as we know, all domestic poultry has been kept inside since December to stop bird flu spreading. The disease has been found in birds near Settle, as well as Lancashire, Lincolnshire and Northumberland. Well, this week, DEFRA said some birds in low-risk areas can be let out. Others in high-risk areas have to stay inside, however, and that includes the Ripon area, Castle Howard, Moulton, Scarborough and Weldrake as well. Here's Adam Bedford, Regional Director of the National Farmers Union in the North East.
There'll be a situation where there will be a designated high-risk zone where birds must continue to be housed. But those outside this high-risk zone have the option to allow their birds to free range, but to make sure that they've looked at the potential risk and they put different measures in place to make sure that that's taken account of.
It's the first time in 25 years the government's taken steps like this to keep poultry separate from wild birds. To find out how it's impacting on poultry keepers and farmers as well, we spoke to Adrian Potter, Director at James Potter Eggs, based near Thirsk.
First of all, the whole country is still high risk. I think what you've got is high risk and very high risk. We do have some birds in what you call a very high risk area, and most are in just what were high risk. So DEFRA said for those birds in very high risk, there's a housing order still in place, and then birds have got to stay inside their own welfare. For the birds in not very high risk, that's producers are asked to make their own risk assessments, whether they feel comfortable, whether it's in the bird's best interest to let them birds out. When we've done a risk assessment, we're just not comfortable at the moment. We just don't think it's in the bird's best interest welfare.
What do you actually do with your risk assessment? How do you decide that? What are you looking for?
It's just looking at a number of wild birds in the area. It's the incident. I mean, we've just had recently last week had an outbreak in Northumberland, which is pretty close, and we just don't feel it's safe to let them out yet. It's just not in the interests of their. I think if people want free range eggs, we've got to make sure the birds are safe, and so we'll be reviewing this on a fortnightly basis.
We heard there some people that we spoke to in York say they just assume the free range. They don't even notice. So if your eggs aren't being classed as free range, how are you going to let people know? Do you have to label them differently?
We do, yeah. I mean, it's all about transparency. So from tomorrow, we're going to label every pack, and this is across as an industry. Every pack's going to be labelled, whether actually the birds are let outside or not. They're going to be labelled with a little blue label that says birds temporarily housed in barns for welfare. So consumers will know what exactly is going on at the moment. And as I say, some birds will be let out. It's just, we're still in what I think, is a dangerous period for bird flu, but it's getting proven all the time. So hopefully, before long, we should be out of this, and then we can look back, once the migration's finished for wild birds, we can look back on the situation and sort of put plans in place for next year. And as an industry, I know we will get over this, and we will find a way forward.
Adrian Potter, Director at James Potter Eggs near Thirsk. Hill farming has never been a choice for anyone really that wants an easy life. It's got early mornings, you're out on all weather, 365 days of the year, and often, let's be honest, it's harder farming than you might find elsewhere around the country or around the world. And for a long time it seemed that the economics don't always add up for some hill farms, and Brexit has really added uncertainty to that industry and the people farming up in the uplands of North Yorkshire. It's something that was covered on BBC One on Inside Out, as Paul Hudson reports.
This is a normal winter's morning, starting in the dark.
Tenant farmer Gary Schofield's day starts at 6 a.m. To add to his income as a sheep farmer, he also raises some beef cattle. The hours are long and the work is hard, but the economics of the business have never been tougher.
It's very much now dependent on a food policy that needs to be developed by our government for post-Brexit times, because if they do go down the road of cutting subsidies to farmers across the country, which then drives farmers to food production on mass scale to fill the gap, then they're going to lose the environmental benefits that's been created over the last 40 years through subsidies, and they're going to lose the cheap food policy because people will go out of business.
Gary and his wife Jill have had to look at ways of making the land pay, but not just through agriculture. They hope this field will be open as a campsite this year.
The need for an alternative was huge. We have 2 children. We have one we're trying to support through university. It was an absolute necessity because we were looking at such a dramatic shortfall in payment. It was quite frightening.
Farmers aren't alone in facing post-Brexit uncertainty, but without the subsidies the EU provide to make food production viable, there are genuine fears for the future. Dales farming isn't just a business, it's a way of life.
Paul Hudson reporting from Gary Schofield's farm near Buckton in the Yorkshire Dales. And Gary spoke to Radio York in more detail.
Generally, over the last 10 years, we've been able to make a profit every year because of these environmental enhancements that we've had since 2001. Recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, we have noticed that our profits have been reducing year on year by probably about 10% per year, you see. So this is the point at which we decided we really do have to sit down and look at a way to produce a stable long-term business that can run into the future. Well, the conclusions that we came to was that the beef and the lamb, without the subsidies, is going onto the marketplace at below the cost of production. So basically we're using the environmental enhancements that have been coming onto the farm for environmental benefits to subsidise cheap food onto the marketplace. Well, I'd like to hear some form of definite forward plan, really. I mean, at the moment we're all running commercial businesses and we can't plan into the future without knowing whether we're going to have to do it through production or whether the environmental enhancements are still going to be here in some form or other into the long term, really. And that is something that has not really been spoken about even since Brexit vote in June. So, yes, some long-term commitment would be fantastic.
Are you confident that's what you'll hear?
As it stands at the moment, I am assuming that we are going to get something, but it won't be anything near enough to maintain our businesses on a commercial scale. Well, in that situation, that's why we have gone down the route personally of stabilising the business through setting up this campsite at Buckden, which hopefully should fill the gap, assuming that people are going to come and stay here.
But is that something that you, when you originally set out, I mean, been in farming for years, is that a route you really want to go down? I know it's a necessity, but...
Well, I can't say that it was really. I mean, we've had a small-scale camping thing on the farm for probably 10 or 15 years, but only very small scale through planning problems and that sort of thing. But, I mean, when I started farming when I was 18, 19-year-old, all I wanted to do was farm, and that was just passionately all I ever wanted to do. And I still do, but it has to be done on a sensible scale, and it's got to work with Mother Nature when you farm up here.
As I mentioned, I went to go and see Razan al-Zeus, who fled fighting in 2012 in Damascus and now is bringing a taste of Syria to Yorkshire via Yorkshire Dammer cheese. And the Dammer gets its name from Damascus. She produces award-winning halloum, or halloumi as you might know it, which is stocked across the north of England.
We thought we need to have molds for the cheese, and we found this is rectangular, good stainless steel, and we stuck them all on top of each other. Then we put the weight on top.
There's a table in front of us that comes up to about my knees, and there are the gleaming stainless steel trays, like you say. That's similar to what you'd find in the roasting tin in the oven, perforated with loads of holes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this really was then building a business from scratch.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, for example, for the cheese cheese making going into stages. First of all, coagulating the milk, heating the milk. So we use the used to be ice cream maker, so now it's a cheese vat. And when we developed our business, this is the first year when we started the business with this equipment, we managed to have the Bronze Prize World Cheese Award. Then by keep making cheese, selling the cheese, we managed to have a new equipment. And that affect on the quality of the cheese, as the year after we won the Golden Prize for the World Cheese Awards.
You've gone from a bronze award to a gold award, and not so recently from a much smaller factory to now this huge space full of the stainless steel. You've got your staff there working in their white overalls, making the product. It must be indicative of the fact that sales are going very well.
Yeah, we started the business in 2014. We managed to have the Bronze Prize first year, the second year Golden Prize World Cheese Award. We had the Silver Prize for British Cheese Award, and last year we had 2016 Best Cheese in Yorkshire for the chili halloumi. Here we are packing the cheese. This is our new product. This is the second product we make. Well, we do halloumi first of all with the 3 flavors. It's the plain, chili and mint. And with the Princess Royal presence, we launched a new flavor. It's not exist anywhere around the world, called smoked halloumi. We smoke the cheese with the wooden chips, so it gives the smoked taste, and it was absolutely fantastic. Now, a new product, we make it. We call it in the Middle East labneh, but I thought I need to explain what it is. We call it spreadable yogurt.
It looks fantastic. There's the tray there with the Hessian cloth, and it's just being filled into the pots which are being weighed off, and then, like you say, put in the backpack machine. You can just smell it as well in the background. What's it like having to introduce people to a brand new product, whether it's this or whether it's smoked halloumi, which is nowhere else in the world?
No. It's not easy. It needs me to talk a lot, and but I really enjoy being in the market, being in the food festival, talk to people, and I really surprised how people are really well educated. So for me, selling cheese is not a matter of a product. People asking how much, buy it and go. Everyone asking me in very small details, the method, the content, fat content, proteins content. I really, whenever I spend like 8 hours in the market, after that I'm really tired and exhausted. But I'm enjoying, because for my point of view, I'm here today because I learned from each question. This is a proper test to the market, and this is the reality life. Like, if you stay in the office and do just calculation by numbers, you won't reach this result, because numbers always telling what I'm doing is very high risk. But when you go to the reality and meet people and talk to them, they guide me. They are my business plan, and I'm following their desires.
Razan Al-Zeus and Yorkshire Dammer Cheese. I think we'll be hearing much, much, much more from her, seeing her win far more awards as well over the next coming months, weeks and years. There are more products in the pipeline. I think she's up to very good things indeed. That's it for this week's episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for downloading it. If you want more on the entire programme, then head to our website, bbc.co.uk/Radio York. You can download it there. You can listen to the entire hour-long programme as well. And if you want to find out more on me, then head to Twitter. I'm at Gareth Barlow. Until next week, if you enjoy your farming, do so, and of course enjoy some good old food and the good old countryside.
This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Radio York.
Hello, you've downloaded the Yorkshire Farming Podcast from the BBC, and for that you should get a round of applause. We don't have one, but a round of applause nonetheless. If you're a regular, you know we talk about food, farming and rural affairs in North Yorkshire and further afield. If you're not a regular, then you know that now as well. On this week's episode of the podcast, we'll be taking a look at producing power from plants, how bioethanol can be produced from feed-grade wheat and then put into the petrol we put into our cars. It's very scientific, but don't worry, we simplified it down slightly because, well, I needed a bit of explaining. We'll also be taking a look at the Red Squirrel Volunteers. 5,000 are being called for across the UK to help save that iconic species. There's only around 140,000 of them left. And of course, bird flu and free-range eggs. We've talked lots about it. There's more on that situation. We'll have that shortly. If you want to get in touch with the programme and the podcast, then do drop me a line. It's Gareth Barlow at bbc.co.uk. You can also find me on Twitter. It's at Gareth Barlow. So that leaves us with one thing left to do as ever. Let's start the podcast.
Yorkshire Farming.
Gareth Barlow.
BBC Radio York.
If you're having free-range eggs, you might not have them quite as free-range as you considered. And as we've discussed on this programme in the past, since last December, hens in British farms have been cooped up in barns under emergency government measures to prevent the spread of bird flu. Now, this is allowed because there is a 12-week grace period under EU laws for free-range farming of eggs and meats, meaning the produce can still technically be sold as free-range, even if that's not been the case for up to 12 weeks. Now, recently you might have seen the stickers that have started to appear on boxes of free-range eggs announcing that for the hens that laid the eggs have been kept temporarily in barns for their welfare. Well, for more on the situation and what we might see beyond the end of this month when those regulations change slightly, I spoke to Duncan Priestner, poultry farmer on the NFU National Poultry Board.
The way we stand at the moment is still a legal requirement for anybody with any hens. That doesn't matter if you've got 3 or 4 hens or you've got thousands of hens. They have to be locked up into sheds and kept away from wild birds until the 28th of February.
And is that going to change after the 28th of February? Are we expecting a leniency or a kind of a relaxation of any of those restrictions?
Yeah, after the 28th of February, DEFRA, I think they're going to almost certainly split the country into what we call higher risk areas and then the rest of the country, which is actually still high risk. They've produced an interactive map, and on that map, producers will have to see where they are on that map. And if you are in one of the high risk areas that's designated, you won't be allowed to allow your birds out. If you're in the other areas, then you will be allowed to let your birds back out again.
How do you go about communicating the challenges and the restrictions being placed on you?
Well, again, I think hopefully there'll be some point of sale notices where people are buying the eggs in the shops. I know a lot of them do it on the websites, but we have been talking to the retailers a lot. We're all very, very concerned about not pulling the wool over consumers' eyes, but the feedback we're getting is that actually most consumers understand it. They can see what's going on. We're an animal loving nation. We want to make sure that the birds are protected, and I think most consumers do get it. I think they do understand it.
Duncan Priestner from the NFU National Poultry Board, and we'll keep you updated with all the rules and regulations as and when they change and when they're applicable to you. Red squirrels are the focus of people's attention. There's efforts to look at how greys can be controlled, and red squirrels have suffered in recent times. Their population's been declined since the introduction of those greys, back in the 1950s. So what could be for one of our most iconic species? Well, the Wildlife Trusts are having their biggest ever recruitment drive for red squirrel volunteers. They want to build an army of 5,000 to help save the UK's last remaining reds. Kathleen Thomas is programme manager of Red Squirrels United, and I caught up with her earlier in the week.
So what we're asking people to do is to just help us in lots of different ways. We do regular squirrel surveys that people can get involved with, which involves putting trail cameras into woodlands so that we can monitor whether we've got red squirrels or grey squirrels. We also ask people to get involved in terms of education, so helping us to spread the message to the public about the impact that the grey squirrel is having on the red squirrel, but also all the other things it impacts on, like tree health. It has a role in bird predation, and potentially, depending on the feed that it eats, it can impact other small mammals. So it's really asking people to spread that message and to be aware.
There's estimated 140,000 red squirrels in the UK, around that number. Yeah. If we don't do anything, what will happen to them?
They will disappear completely if we don't do anything. We need to be out there controlling grey squirrels. So through our project, we have some scientific research that's running alongside the conservation work, and that's really showing that if we stopped today controlling grey squirrel populations, we would lose reds within a generation.
Kathleen Thomas, programme manager of Red Squirrels United. Now then, it's time to talk about power and cars. And this really is very apt at the moment because the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, has said drivers considering buying diesel cars should take a long, hard think. And there's concerns over the amount of nitrogen dioxide emitted from diesel vehicles. And it's estimated that nitrogen dioxide is responsible for about 23,500 deaths in the UK each year. And so they really are looking now at the amount of emissions coming from diesel. Well, we're going to be talking about petrol because farmers in North Yorkshire are helping to power our cars. Wheat grown around the county is sent to the UK's largest bioethanol plant on the banks of the Humber. And the petrol we put in our cars is 5% bioethanol, and there's plans to increase it to 10% to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Well, I've been to go and see how we get our power from plants. We're stood several hundred feet up on a gantry by the side of a building, gently swaying in the breeze. Down beneath us is a myriad of metalwork. There's pipes, there's buildings, there's conveyor belts, there's great big towers piercing the sky as well, and then loads of storage vessels. It is a sight to behold. It is a very complicated sight. Mark, what is beneath us? What are we standing above?
We've got a very large mill which we're stood with our backs to, where we process up to 1.1 million tonnes of domestically grown UK animal feed wheat. From that wheat, we take the sugar and convert it into alcohol, which is essentially what bioethanol is for blending into petrol. And we take the balance of the co-products and we produce a high quality, high protein animal feed for sales back into actually the UK farmer.
You mentioned bioethanol. What exactly is it? What does it entail?
So bioethanol is a very, very strong spirit, a very strong alcohol. The product that we produce is for blending into petrol. And the aim of that is to decarbonise the emissions from UK transport. And currently in the petrol that your listeners are buying today, there will be up to 5% bioethanol that they're pouring into their tanks at the pump.
We've referenced the sites. The smell in the background is the UK's largest brewery. It has a very kind of yeasty, hoppy kind of smell to it. We'll head back down all the steps and go and take a further look. Great.
We're in what we call Brewery Alley. We believe we have the largest brewery in the UK, and at any given moment there will be around about 25,000 tonnes of wheat beer stored in this brewery. The product will stay here for approximately 58 to 60 hours as it goes from very little in terms of alcohol to around about 12 to 13%. It will then be pumped into the tank, which we call the beer well, and then from that beer well we feed forward into our distillation area, where we start to separate off the alcohol for the bioethanol.
At the moment then, we've got beer in these vessels, 13-14%, a pretty strong stout, 58 to 60 odd hours. How long does it take to get from the wheat that's entered?
This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Radio York.
Hello, you're listening to the Yorkshire Farming Podcast from the BBC with me, Gareth Barlow. Each week we explore food, farming and rural affairs in North Yorkshire and the great British countryside. And on this week's podcast, we're starting with a cup of tea.
Just pouring some gingerbread rooibos. So this is a caffeine-free. It's not really a tea, but it's not a herbal blend, it's a completely different plant altogether.
More on that shortly. And also, as the weather warms up, as the bulbs start to come through the soil, it's time to think about lambing. And I've been to see what it takes to lamb a sheep.
I am going to do something, because looking at that lamb, it looks like the bag that it's wrapped in is perhaps still wrapped around its nose, and if we don't move it quickly, it will suffocate.
Find out the fate shortly. And the UK's oldest national trail is the Pennine Way. It's also one of our longest at 268 miles, and the trail is looking for its very own real ale. We'll have more on that. If you ever want to get in touch, then do drop me an email. It's garethbarlow@bbc.co.uk, or you can find me on Twitter. Just search Gareth Barlow.
Yorkshire Farming.
Gareth Barlow.
BBC Radio York.
The Pennine Way is looking to create an official beer that embodies the spirit of the 268-mile-long route. I've been taking a look. A good old walk through North Yorkshire's amazing countryside, plodding through winter puddles and revelling in unrivalled views. At the backbone of the footpaths that crisscross our landscape is the Pennine Way. It was the UK's first national trail, one of its longest, and as Heather Proctor, who works for the trail, points out, it passes through some iconic places.
It passes many of the real scenic highlights of the Northern Pennines, including things like Malham Cove, High Cup, Penny Ghent, and the Cheviot Hills up in the Scottish borders.
Along its 268 miles, you'll pass through small villages, market towns, and a huge variety of rural landscapes. Heather Proctor again.
It varies all along the trail. But the common theme is that it's fairly hilly. You'll get a mixture of the heather moorland, especially in the Peak District. You'll have bits of farmland and pasture, lots of sheep grazing and cattle in various places. As you come into the Yorkshire Dales, you get more of the limestone scenery. So you get spectacular sites such as Malham Cove in the limestone pavement. You pass through all sorts of fantastic river valleys full of wildflowers and hay meadows. You get lots of waterfalls, so including high force and low force on the River Tees. And you get some really stunning remote wild landscapes where you'll hardly see anybody for days.
And all that grand scenery will hopefully offer a hint of inspiration for a brand new Pennine Way beer. They're on the lookout for a brewery to distill down the essence of our landscape. And let's be honest, what walk doesn't improve with a pint at the end?
We have a lot of work to maintain the trail every year, and we're struggling to secure funding from our more normal sources. So this was a bit of an innovative idea that hopefully will inspire people, get people interested in the trail, and provide a valuable and interesting product to those who are walking on the trail as well. We hope that there's a brewery out there who will have an interest in the Pennine Way. We know there's a lot of breweries located in the Pennines.
As for the brew itself and what it will taste like, with a huge range of weather and a variety of views, Heather Proctor says it really could be anything.
Most people walk the Pennine Way in the summer, so maybe something lighter might be attractive to those walkers. But on the other hand, the weather can be pretty tough, so something a bit heavier might be welcomed on those cold and rainy days.
Heather Proctor and the new Pennine Way ale that they're trying to create for the 268-mile-long route. I've walked a bit of it. I've done from between, Malham, all the way up to, the Tan Hill Inn, the highest pub in England, certainly in England, maybe not in the UK itself. And I was doing it with a friend who's an ex-Royal Marine, and we were going to do it over 3 days, and because he walks far too fast, we ended up doing a day and a half. My feet absolutely killing me. I could have done with a pint at the end, that much is for sure. Personally, I quite like an English breakfast or an Earl Grey, both of them black. I don't need any milk, thank you very much. Slice of lemon in the Earl Grey would be just fine indeed. But the world of tea is really, really diverse. It is just remarkable, and I went to go and find out. Catherine England is the manager of Hebden Tea in the Shambles in York, and I met her out on the street.
Just pouring some gingerbread rooibos. So this is a caffeine-free. It's not really a tea, but it's not a herbal blend, it's a completely different plant altogether. And then we've also got a blood orange green tea, it's an organic one, and then a jasmine flavoured blooming tea. So as you can see in this teapot, it's a flower, gorgeous flower, and it sort of infuses to make a really nice organic jasmine green tea.
I've got to describe where we are. We're in the centre of York. I can just see the Minster down through the Shambles, the iconic street in the city. And then we're outside the front of Hebden Tea, and the window's open, the sash window's open, and there is in front of us these glass teapots, and then these different tasters. And what should I expect when I try them?
Just a very delicious taste. They're all loose leaf. All those teas are loose leaf, so no sort of tea bag quality. It's all loose. There's more room for the leaves to infuse, so you get a much fuller flavour, more aromatic, I think.
We're going for the green tea first, and like you say, it's got the blooming jasmine inside. Very light flavour. They're not very strong at all. Is that what I should expect?
Yes, very delicate, very fragrant. It's very popular. The jasmine tea, one of the most popular green teas we have.
Well, there's loads more inside. Shall we pop inside and have a look? We'll take these with us.
So everything's in 100-gram bags. You get a lot in there. Some of the teas, such as the green teas and the white teas, the oolongs and pu'ers, you can reinfuse. So you can use 1 teaspoon numerous times and get as much flavour out of them as possible before throwing them away, which with a tea bag you wouldn't have as much in there, unfortunately.
You've mentioned, as we've been talking, green tea, white tea, black tea. I have to say I'm incredibly ignorant. I just think of tea and then green tea. What are the differences?
Well, I always like to picture tea on sort of a spectrum. So black tea is the most processed. It's had oxidation process and the drying of the leaves. The white teas would be the top of that. So you've got the very fresh young leaves, the youngest leaves, the first ones picked in the year. That's the white teas. And then moving down the spectrum, you've got green teas. They're dried and withered, with no oxidation in there. Then we've got further along blue teas, which are the oolong teas. There are lots of different oolong teas. They're sort of part fermented, and then the pu'ers, which are aged green teas. You get ripe ones, raw ones, sort of the vintage wines of the tea world. There's so much different. And then if we move down here towards the herbs and tisanes, we've got all these different ones that people say herbal teas. They often just mean tisanes, which are non-caffeinated, chamomile and mint and sage.
We've just stopped. It's the most unusual thing in the shop. I've never seen anything like it. We have a small, kind of about the size of a tennis ball, wrapped in brown paper. And what on earth are they?
So it's pu'er tea. It's a pu'er nest, an aged green tea that's been steamed and pressed into this small nest. Traditionally, it's because it's easier to transport like that. And when tea was used as a currency, you know, you can just give them a nest. Or we get little cakes in different shapes and sizes, and some of them are just ornamental and you wouldn't want to drink them. But it's very earthy taste. Some people are a little bit put off by the smell, but once you try it, oh, it's fantastic.
Exploring the world of tea in the centre of York.